Welcome. This is the podcast series dedicated to living a revenue culture. You can never maximize your profits until you first optimize your people. And if you're going to be around for a long time, that's a very important thing to do. The purpose of this podcast is to bring you people out there in the real world who are actually doing this on a daily basis. We do this twice a month, and then they live on the web forever. So hopefully you'll find this interesting and you'll come back and join us for the future. Today, we're happy to have Park Howell with us. Parks believes in your story, and he thinks it matters. And especially if you want to grow sales, attract the right people, attract the right customers, attract the right market to you. But if you don't tell your story, who's going to? Well, Park's here to help you with that today. For 35 years, he's been helping people with branding and marketing and sales and preaching and teaching about how to differentiate and be distinctive. And today he teaches beyond that. He teaches to share your story in the world. And he not only wants you to share it, but he wants you to share it with ease and with joy. And so Park is living an adventure life, helping leaders like you excel through telling your story. Park, welcome.
Rick, thanks so much for having me here. You and I got a chance to get acquainted briefly at the Arizona Growth Advisory Group breakfast back about a month ago. And yes, our mutual friend Candace made an introduction, and I'm so pleased that she did, and so grateful to be on your show today.
Well, good. I'm glad to have you, because storytelling is one of those things that probably everybody talks about, and most people have no idea what they're talking about, and they don't practice. Yeah. And so I'm hoping you'll, first tell us just a little bit about your background. And when you do that, I'm going to hope that you explain how you do this with ease and joy, because all of us need more ease and joy. So if you just give us your background and tell us, what it is that your business is about today.
Sure. Well, I live up here north of you in northern Arizona, but I grew up in the Seattle area. And Jeff Bezos, right? Everybody knows Jeff Bezos, Amazon. Well, he once said, when somebody asked him, what is a brand? And he said, a brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. So being a Northwest boy myself, I would like to clarify that. I want to get more specific, and I think that's what we'll be talking about today. It's not what people say about you when you're not in the room. It's the stories people tell about you when you're not in the room. And if you don't control that narrative and they can't easily understand and communicate your story, well, then you know what's going to happen, Rick, right? They're going to tell a story that you did not intend for, unless you intentionally tell them that story. And my quick background, I did grow up in the Pacific Northwest. I've been down in Arizona since 1985, to date myself here a bit. Still have a lot of friends and family up there. But when I was up there, I studied both music composition and theory at Washington State University and journalism communications. I figured I could probably make money in the advertising world, maybe not so much as a composer, but I just loved it. I loved music composition and theory. And I thought, when else am I really going to study this than on my way to journalism classes? And so I ended up getting 2 degrees. Little did I know, about 3 decades later, those roads of communications and advertising and music composition and theory would intersect at what I do today. And that is, as you had mentioned in the lead up to this, is I help business leaders excel through the stories they tell by teaching them story composition and theory. And by that, I mean specifically for business to business, and organizational communications, where we all tend to get completely locked up in our logic, reason-driven, data-driven brain, and we communicate that way, when what our audiences really want is to put all that big thinking into the context of an emotional story so that they can understand what in the world we're talking about in the first place. That's what I do.
Wow. You've got to tell me more about combining the music with the story. I mean, I know when I think about composing, and I know nothing about composing, but what little I know, I think about it, and I often wonder, do I write the music or do I write the words? And then in a sense, is that how you approach the storytelling? That there's kind of a music and a flow to it, and the story comes out of it.
There really is. But first, think about it like driving a Formula One race car. Now, you can have the music and you can have the story, which are, the body, the framework, the wheels, the color, and all that. But unless you have a really stout chassis to that race car and know how to drive it, the rest of it doesn't matter. So that's my way of saying, start with form. And what the one form that we teach that builds off of itself is this 3-word form called the and, but, therefore. We call it the ABT, Agile Narrative Framework. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But it's starting with the structure and the form of your story and your communication first, which is setup, problem, resolution. It's this tripartite structure to story that has been around since the beginning of time. Aristotle, in his book called Poetics, all about storytelling, said a story has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And if you don't have a story if you don't have all 3 of those components. And in business, we typically leave out the middle of the story. That's the complication, the problem, the things that we're really toiling with. In business, we tend to show up and say, hey, you need this. We're really great at that. You want to buy some, no storytelling, non-narrative.
Yep.
Music, the sonata allegro form perfected by Mozart, is based on the 3-act structure of exposition, development, resolution. Exposition introduced the music, the theme, the narrative themes, the chord structure, the key. They get you set up with that setting of music. And then what Mozart would do in the development phase, or Act 2, essentially turn all of that on its head. You might go from a major key to a minor key. He might be playing those themes backwards. He's messing with your limbic problem-solving brain. It's listening to it and say, wow, this is amazing. Where's it going? How does it resolve? And then he ends on Act 3, where he brings Act 1 and Act 2 together for the resolution. So where else do we see it? In philosophy, Hegel, famous, for debate, right? His dialectic, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Rick, you and I are debating 3-act structure. You state this premise, that's your thesis. Mine is the antithesis to that. I state the exact opposite premise, or attack your premise, and then we come together for a debate to resolve the situation. So you can see that our brain is set up for this setup, problem, resolution framework. We call it agreement, contradiction, and consequence. And when you, as a business or organizational storyteller, set up all of your communications, from emails to social posts to sales presentations to videos, with the setup, problem, resolution dynamic, agreement, contradiction, consequence, then you are hacking through the noise that we all deal with in the world out there, and you're connecting with this subconscious limbic brain, which is set up as a problem solution, decision-making, buying brain. It is how it likes to make meaning out of the madness of being human beings. Does that make sense? I know I threw a lot at you there.
Yeah, I'm quite familiar with the neuroscience around the communication part. So this fits perfectly. So tell me, how do you engage with your client? Because that's fascinating, and it's certainly what we all gotta get good at. So when you're working in the real world, where do you start, and how do you position and prepare? And I'm assuming, from what I know, you don't just explain this to them, you help people actually walk away being able to apply this.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And so, like you're talking about, the revenue game is really about building the culture game. Well,
Uh-huh.
isn't that what storytelling is about, is building that powerful culture internally so you have a common storytelling language internally, and then externally you express that to the world to 10x your sales growth or whatever. The way I teach it is a number of different ways. So I was fortunate, a little bit more of my backstory. So I get out of school, mid 80s. I worked for different ad agencies as a writer for about 10 years and always really jonesing to start my own company, which I did in 1995. It's called Park and Company, Park and Co., and an ad agency in Phoenix, Arizona that I ran for 20 years. I found storytelling in the early 2000s because this was the advent of social media, e-commerce,
Yeah.
and this massive amount of noise that is just about ready to descend on all of us. And I realized that it wasn't working the way it used to work, advertising, branding, and marketing was. So I went to find a solution. I found it in Hollywood. Our son went to Chapman University, their film school over in Orange, California. Fantastic film school. And I said, Parker, while you're going there, please send me your books and your recorded lectures when you're done with them. And since I'm paying for them, because I want to know, what does Hollywood know about creating competitive stories in the most competitive storytelling market in the world? That's where I found the hero's journey. I created my 10-step story cycle system for brand story development out of that. And from that, found the 5 primal elements of a short story, a little anecdotal story that can make your business point for you, and the big impact of that. And of course, led me to the and, but, therefore, which I found from a good friend of mine, Dr. Randy Olson. Anyways, when I'm teaching this, we all start with the ABT. I build the foundation there, level them up to a little anecdotal story to make your business point for you, and then show you how to use the 10-step story cycle system. I first start all of my customers, and I've got big and small customers alike. Walmart Canada, we're teaching thousands of their associates how to do this. The Home Depot here in America, gone through several of their divisions with this. The U.S. Air Force, and then I do a lot of one-on-one coaching. But I like to start everybody else out first with this little, under an hour testimony or tutorial online course that they first take, and they learn about the and, but, therefore, and then they send me their little ABT messages as we're starting to build their narrative intuition. Then I'm either go in person or do virtual training like this. Like I was just out in Ohio a couple of weeks ago at the University of Dayton Center for Leadership. And I went out there for a day and worked with a 37 person cohort in person out there. So I do that training. Then we launch into a 21-day deliberate practice program where for 21 days, they get a little fun email from me that says, let's spot and craft ABTs in the wild. You're going to see the story framework everywhere while you're using it and applying it to your own business. And then we ultimately follow up after that with another virtual session. It's kind of an ask me anything session, Rick, where we go through the whole process and they bounce ABTs and anecdotes off of me and I help them sculpt that. The thinking here is it only works as if you practice it. That's why by the time I'm done with them, I have their attention on and off for about 6 weeks. And we have learned that's about the amount of time it takes to really start understanding and embedding these concepts into your brain so that your narrative intuition becomes much more natural than forced. So it's a hybrid way of training, basically. Online, in person, virtually.
It's interesting, as I was listening and you mentioned, I think, the Air Force. One of the things I was wondering is, does the storytelling have an impact inside organizations as well as from organizations out to their market?
Oh, totally does. I mean, that's where everybody starts, really, is we got to get our people telling the same story internally so that they can embrace it. They can build camaraderie, that culture that you talk about. If you're going to optimize your culture, you have to optimize your communication. And that doesn't mean B2B, which is boring to board in my world of communication. It means truly connecting with that human, that Homo sapien sitting across from you, because we're all storytelling animals. And this is how we make meaning out of the madness of being human beings. Think about it. There's a fantastic book called Sapiens by Noble Harari. And he talks about the power of story as our first technology that we first understood. I mean, we had to learn how to communicate in these algorithms of story in order to build fire, to learn, to grow, and whatever.
Sure.
Well, that's the way we still all communicate today. We plan, organize, and act in story, don't we? I mean, isn't every sale in your world, Rick, a fictional story until your customer buys, and then you, as the salesperson, the brand, or the organization, it's your job to deliver on all the promises you made in that fictional account of what tomorrow would look like, that only becomes reality when tomorrow shows up and you do what you say you're going to do. There is no other being in this world that we know of that can play, plan, and act into a fiction and then live into it and make it a nonfiction, make it a reality.
Wow, interesting way to think about it. Now, as you were talking about the kind of the cultural aspects of this, often we hear people say, it's important that we have we use common words and we have a common language and a common cadence, in order to build our culture. Now, are stories all verbatim, or are they, do people use their own, style or background to tell the stories?
Oh, yeah, that's a beautiful thing about it, is once you learn these frameworks, they're simply guidelines, then you bring your own unique personality, your own unique character, your own unique archetype to the telling of that story. It can be verbally, like we're doing right here. It can be in written form, in video form, in all the forms, social media, and all the forms that we have available to us. But if we are not thinking about the form of setup, problem, resolution, agreement, contradiction, consequence, we tend to just go on, and this, and this, and this, and this. And we never get out of exposition. We never get out of Act One because we haven't inserted a problem into this conversation. And this limbic brain, this amygdala hippocampus brain of ours, which is all built for the survival of our being, if it gets bored, it will turn off. Because it's like, dude, there's nothing here. There's no fight, flight, freeze, or fawn situation here. I'm out of here. I got to go and look at something that's more compelling. So as soon as we get rid of those feature lists, those bullet points, and all that functional BS that we talk about, and really start placing it in the context of a story of setup, problem, resolution, we will bore our audiences to death. And Rick, when was the last time you were bored into buying anything?
That's
never.
You have some interesting frames of reference for this. Yeah, I don't think I've ever been bored into buying anything, at least.
Well, people will argue, they'll tell me, well, COVID, I was pretty bored there. So I was online and I was buying all kinds of stuff. I go, that's not what I'm talking about. Whoever was selling to you, if they were boring, would you buy from them? They go, no, probably not.
Yeah, interesting. So how do you help organizations run this through their whole organization? Because I mean, this is the kind of thing you don't want to just end with the CEO or end with, sales leaders. This is the kind of thing that you want the employees to tell stories about how cool the place is they work, so they recruit their friends to come work there too. And
without a doubt,
you want leaders telling stories to employees so they understand, the mission, the culture, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it comes down to, Rick, being able to scale this training. So in the case of Walmart Canada, as well as Goodwill, as a matter of fact, Goodwill of Central and Northern Arizona is the largest Goodwill franchise in the world. A lot of people don't realize Goodwills are actually franchised areas out that people, create these stores. Well, I'm working with both of those separately, but I have a train the trainer program. So I'll go in and work with their leadership and their like middle managers, but then I'll also train some of their learning and development people about how to scale and train this stuff internally without me. And then they bring me in when they need me or for bigger events and that kind of thing. But everything we do is vastly scalable. And a lot of times, and this is funny, Rick, I'm curious if you see this in your world, if you're sitting in a room, and this just happened to me down in Phoenix, there was 60 some people in this room, and they were all leaders. And I asked them from all different industries. I said, how many of you are leaders in this room? Well, as you might imagine, every hand went up, right? And then I said, how many of you in this room are in sales? And I don't even think half of the hands went up. And I said, I hate to break this to you, but every single one of you is in sales. As a leader, if you're trying to get your people to buy into your mission, into your vision, into your internal initiatives, into your culture, guess what? You're selling. You don't have to be selling a product or service to be in sales. We are all in sales. And that means our goal in life to be really effective in our careers and our businesses and our organizations means we've got to learn how to be persuasive and influential in communications that land right the first time, every time, because if we confuse, we lose. And that's where these frameworks come in, because again, as I mentioned earlier, like the and, but, therefore, this 3-word framework, it is an algorithm that neatly nestles into the limbic brain so it can easily understand and make meaning out of the messages that we're trying to create. So you think about storytelling, to me, is the Velcro for culture. Here's my world, here's your world and an internal culture. Let's tell stories and bring us together to make a third, more powerful thing.
Interesting. One of the things revenue science research tells us is that in a business today, if you want to attract the right employees and you want to attract the right investors and the right customers, your purpose matters. Now, I'm guessing that when an organization has an intentional purpose, something they're passionate about, what you do would help them share that story to those various constituent groups. Is that and can you tell us a little bit about having done that and how that works and what kind of outcomes people get from it?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go back to 2008. I know that seems like a long time ago. What is that, about 15, 16 years ago? Here in Arizona back then was this community health center that had been around for 30 years leading up to that point, 33 years, actually, by the time they came to me. And they had a real problem, a revenue problem, being a state and federally funded problem. All of that money was being halved on them. And they were having to shut down some of their clinics. And their whole mission in life was to be able to serve the underserved. Healthcare for those, regardless of your ability to pay. And so they brought me in. They said, we need to reframe our story from the past 33 decades to make it more relevant today, because what we have to do if we are going to survive is we have to attract general practitioners that may already be in another, profitable practice, but we want to bring them into a community health center so that we have all these great specialties for our people. Plus, we need to attract paying customers. I mean, patients like you that are already happy with your family doctor, but you've got all these new services available to you at a community health center, which plays to the anti-story of you're a community health center. You got to be cheap and not very much quality. So they had to overcome all of that stuff. And what we did is we changed it from Clínica Adelante to Adelante Healthcare. Adelante in Spanish means to advance, to move forward and whatever. And so to attract customers from all different demographics, not just the Hispanic demographic on which they were originally built, we took the Clínica out of it and we just said Adelante Healthcare moving forward. And their purpose. We identified their purpose as sustainable healthcare. Now, 3 pillars of sustainable healthcare for Adelante Healthcare was sustaining the health of our individual patients. So they put in a whole new program of preventive healthcare through nutrition and exercise and working with that. Sustaining the ability, the availability of quality healthcare, regardless of your ability to pay. So playing off of their former mission, but really focusing on this idea about sustainability. And then the third one is sustainable operations, attracting doctors and staff in here that are really interested in greening the practice, reducing our footprint. And oh, by the way, also reduces the cost to run the operation when we do this. So Adelante Healthcare became sustainable healthcare for all. That was their purpose. Then we helped them tell that story both internally to first get buy-in from the brand and the staff and the board and so forth, and the practitioners, and then externally to attract those additional practitioners they're looking for, the paid customers that they needed to make their business model run, and of course, accolades around their sustainability and their green LEED certified clinics. In fact, Adelante Healthcare had the very first LEED certified community health center in the country, precisely because they were living into this story, this purpose-driven story of sustainable healthcare for all. Adelante Healthcare, over the course of 5 years, Rick, grew by 600%. They stopped advertising. They stopped public relations work. They just maintained this business model because it was growing astronomically. And Aveen Sati Tafoya, the CEO that put all that together with us, she will be the first to tell you it was precisely because they got their brand story on purpose, dialed in, taught everybody how to tell it using these frameworks that led to that 600% growth.
When you talk to people about story, and do you find that there's a particular segment of the market, the boomers or the Xers, or that either are resistant or automatically fall in love with the idea?
Well, anybody down in the southeast of America falls in love with the idea. Great storytelling culture in the southeast of America. It just is. It just is.
Interesting.
The demographic age-wise that we find our biggest pushback in are the youngsters, the millennials, the Gen, whatever they are this day, Gen Zs. And when I ask them, why don't they do it? A lot of them will tell me, and some of their leadership will tell me, said, look, they are digital denizens. They grew up with this in their hand, and they have been trolled, and they've seen other people have been trolled, and they get bullied. They've been bullied online. Who knows? Maybe they're the bulliers online. Anyways, that has impacted their ability to be comfortable in sharing a vulnerable story about something about them because they're so afraid that they're going to get trolled. And I'm like, no, man, you got to get over that. That's not what this is about. This is about being authentic with those people that you work with and those customers you're trying to serve. And the only authenticity tool I can think of is your ability to connect with them on a very visceral, emotional level. And you will never do that with features and functions and bullet lists and data. You can only accomplish that through true emotional stories well told.
So you don't think a text with a lot of bullet points and data is going to create great emotional relationships with people?
Well, you give me an example of one that did.
I couldn't possibly. Yeah, interesting. Wow. So
think about it, Rick, we're old enough to remember the old dating ads that people would take out and actually put in the paper. Now they have websites to do all that. But if you're writing it, whether you're online or off, and you're trying to put a dating post out there, you don't say, hi, I'm Park Howell. I'm 5'11". I have a waist of 34 inches and an inseam of 32. I have all my teeth with the exception of 3 crowns. My eyes are blue. My blood type is blah, blah. Now, no one cares about that data. What do they care about? What do you write about? Here's what I love to do. I embrace morning coffee over a sunrise. You go into full storytelling mode to be able to hopefully beckon in out of the savannah of partners out there, just that right person to be able to be your partner. Well, isn't that true in sales? Isn't it true that people buy from those that they know, like, and trust?
Yeah.
Isn't
Yeah.
that true? So what happens if you're unknown? You won't be liked or trusted because nobody knows you. It's like that person who falls in the forest and there's no one around to hear him. Do you hear him falling in the forest, right?
Nope.
If you are known, it doesn't mean you're immediately likable. I can tell you a lot of people, like past presidents, that are well known and not very likable, on both sides of the aisle. If you are known, but you haven't connected emotionally through the stories you tell to build that, that likability, then you're not going to be that likable. So knowing only takes you so far. You now have to be likable, and you only become likable through the stories you tell. Hate to share it with you, but that's the only way. And trust. When you deliver on the promises that you make and those emotional stories you tell, you build trust.
Yeah.
So there's no better forum or mechanism or platform than a true story, well told, to make your business point that will help you become better known, liked, and trusted.
Wow. Tell me, I'm thinking about this from the standpoint, our purpose here is help people live a revenue culture. And I'm thinking about organizations and the new people they hire, whether we're talking about new people as 22-year-olds right out of college, or they worked for somebody else and now they work here. Do you have organizations that intentionally use the power of stories to bring people on board? I mean, we think of onboarding, often as, well, you now have your badge and you now have your phone number and, okay, that's not my idea of onboarding, but, do you have organizations that are sophisticated to the extent that they recognize that story accomplishes those trust and know me and all those kinds of things, which is exactly what onboarding should be about?
Mm-hmm. So, in a word, no. I don't know. I've never worked with one that has got this really dialed in. I've worked with them to help them understand how to do it. But I don't know that again, the fog of war, everyone is so busy. They have such little amount of time that they don't think about story. They think it takes too much time. It takes too much energy and takes too much effort. Rick, I want to get you in here. Let's hear the rules. Here's where you show up. Here's how you do this. Here's your badge. Good luck, man. Let me know if you got any problems, is pretty much the way it goes. But just imagine if a company really had a concerted, designed onboarding direction that could be done very easily and very quickly to create that meaning around what does our culture stand for? What is our purpose in life? Why are you here to help build, and add to that culture, to help contribute to that purpose, and in return, contribute to your own personal growth and your career growth? Those are all stories. Those are all fictional planned stories that we want to tell and activate with this individual to make them nonfiction, to make them reality so that they experience this story. Let's go back real quick to this idea about know, like, and trust. How does that apply to an organization? Well, as we said earlier, Jeff Bezos said a brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. No, a brand is the story people tell about you when you're not in the room. So that know thing, if people don't truly know about you and really understand the unique position that you take in the marketplace, that unique problem that you can help them solve, then your business isn't going to grow. So you first got to tell stories to be known, brand awareness to grow your business. And that's internally and externally. Those applicants need to know who you are, what you stand for, the impact you're having in the world. And you can only, really illustrate that through stories. Then to become liked. All right, so you're known. How do you 10x your sales? By the stories you tell in solution selling. You're not telling stories about product features. Nobody cares about what you make. They only care about what you make happen when you tell stories that illustrate the outcome. So you're 10xing your stories, your solution selling by becoming way more likable. Like, oh my God, Rick, you made that so easy for me to understand. I totally get it. Yes, that's exactly what I want. You're sharing stories with them. And then that trust part comes in when they come back for repeat business. They buy more, your sales go up, and one final added value in that trust metrics, that repeat customer is going to start sharing your story with their world. It's the story they're telling about you when you are not in the room, so that you can benefit from the most powerful form of advertising there is, and that is free word of mouth marketing.
Yeah, one of the things you just mentioned is the customer, and the customer can be an internal customer, an external customer, repeating the story. And
Oh yeah,
I'm assuming, in today's complex revenue generation world, the statistics say that if you're selling in a B2B environment, you're really selling to 7.65 people in every situation. And one of the challenges is those people are, one of them's a lawyer, and one of them's an accountant, and one of them's HR, and one of them's procurement, and one of them even knows about the stuff you're trying to sell, and they don't speak a common language amongst themselves.
mm-hmm.
Is there research or experience that says the stories transcend their differences by being lawyers and engineers and finance people, that the story kind of brings them together?
Yeah, it really does. Let me give you an example of this. In 2010, I was working with Coca-Cola, and they were launching a very large internal initiative for their fleet drivers and staff. It was all around eco-driving. They called it the Smart Driver Program. And what eco-driving is a new way of training them how to drive, changing their behaviors internally about gently pulling away from stoplights, coasting up in hopes that you don't have to come to a complete stop. It's how you drive your vehicle to reduce the impact on the environment. But they also found it reduces the cost of running those rigs. You save fuel, and the wear and tear goes way down, and the liability goes way down because you become a better driver. It's quantifiable across the board. So they brought me in, my agency at the time, Park & Co., and they said, we need to build an internal brand around this initiative to get our very independent truck driver and fleet drivers on board with this Smart Driver Program. We don't want them to think it's some woo-woo, politically correct, save the planet thing. We want them to really do it because we know we can save literally hundreds of millions of dollars in our fleet transportation costs and create safer drivers for everybody all around. So, Rick, when they brought me in, they said, oh, and we have one more thing we need you to do, is you need to help us sell this to the C-suite. We've got a couple of them on board, but the others are kind of pushing back. So we had to find what was in it for each one of these C-suite members and craft the story to what they cared about. Because one of the first rules of thumb, Rick, with all of your storytelling, is you are not the center of the story, your audience is. So we need to understand. So for instance, we went to the CFO, who was like, I don't know if I want to spend, for the cost of this program. Well, when we could go in and say, we know that cost is of utter importance, as is liability and so forth, but we have no way to really measure it and have the impact in the fleet. That's the problem we're solving for. Therefore, the Smart Driver Program could save us upwards of $100 to $200 million quarterly in our fleet transportation costs. All right, I'm on board. Where do I sign? All right, so now let's move to the Chief Sustainability Officer. Chief Sustainability Officer, one of their biggest challenges is when they're trying to communicate this stuff to the world out there, they don't have measurable impact that they can show. So as a Chief Sustainability Officer, we will help you get a program that you can quantifiably share with the world that Coca-Cola is doing its part. So we tell the story from their perspective. The final one was HR. The last thing we need is another program. We needed to demonstrate to the HR the camaraderie this was going to build in the fleet, the 60,000 member fleet drivers and their staff, as we had fun competition pitted between each of the different divisions. And so we built camaraderie around it. So we had one story, the smart driver story, but told in different ways to different audiences, depending on what was in it for them.
Yeah, very, very interesting and very powerful. It's the way organizations can think about disseminating their strategy, because the
Without a
strategy is
doubt.
always going to be the same, but you don't tell it the same way to every listener.
Yeah. Rick, how many of those meetings have you been in with either your maybe a company you worked for or a client that you were helping, and it just got off track because there were 5 different agendas going on all at one time? After an hour or two, you realize that nothing came out of it except frayed, relationships and stress and whatever. I mean, have you ever been involved in one of those?
Yes, more than one.
So the and but therefore is a marvelous story strategy tool when you go into a meeting. You go into a meeting and say, all right, my audience is everybody sitting in this meeting. Collectively, what is it that we want? Collectively, but why don't we have it? Because of this one thing, one singular problem solution narrative. Collectively, what does it look like when we overcome this by doing what? And that by doing what then becomes the central question for the entire meeting. So you go in there, you can cut your meetings by 2/3 because you have this storied strategy of and, but, therefore that builds that meeting out. Whenever anybody goes on a tangent or down a rabbit hole, you go, well, is that in service to the problem solution dynamic that we are here to solve today in this time? If not, let's park it over here and we'll have another meeting for that. And so, to your point, the ABT is a remarkably simple and powerful strategy tool to help get all those storytelling apes in that room all on the same page.
So it's interesting that, and I like the way you said that it actually assists in the creation of the strategy as well as the dissemination.
Yeah. Without a doubt. Here's one more thing you can do with it. So how many times, Rick, have you been in the room or with a customer that they are so frustrated? It's like you're their lifeline, and they sit down with you and they verbally vomit on you for 10 minutes about everything that's going wrong, and they have no idea how to overcome this, and they just don't know what to do and where to turn. Have you ever had that kind of conversation?
Sure.
And so what does a really astute, culture-driven salesperson do? They listen. They shut up and they listen. Like Sandy Peterson, one of my old bosses said, look, we get paid for what goes on between our ears, so use them, right? So you sit there and you let that person do that verbal vomit until they're exhausted, till they're worn out. And now you are paying attention and you're sifting all of that through an ABT in your mind. When they finally take a break, you lean in, you go, all right, Rick, here's what I heard you say. You want this, and it's super important because of this. That's your statement of agreement. It's positive. It's aspirational. You're demonstrating to them that you listen, you understand and appreciate, you understand what they want, and you appreciate why that's important to them. But you don't have it, and it's super frustrating because of this. Now you're communicating that statement of contradiction. You want this, but you don't have it because of this. So you're demonstrating through your listening that you empathize with their frustration and what's going on. Understanding, appreciation, and empathy. There's that tripart structure again, right? Therefore, here's the way forward. So when you do that with someone and you said, here's what I just heard you say, and it's important to you because of this, but you don't have it because of this, therefore, you're looking for this. They will do one of 3 things, or maybe all three things will happen. They will look at you like some sort of Svengali. They'll say, oh my God, you said that better than I did, Rick, which means, gee, you listened. Number 2, nobody ever listens to me like that. Thank you. And then number three, that sometimes happens because you were so clear on what their problem solution dynamic was and why it's important to them. They'll say, you were so clear, Rick, I forgot to tell you one more thing. And it's always that one more thing that is the crux of the problem. Everything else probably up to that point have been symptoms to the bigger problem. But you were able to suss that out simply by using this tripart structure of agreement, contradiction, consequence, using the ABT.
Well,
isn't that cool?
Yeah. You've touched on a whole series of things that I've never heard anybody link to story before. So this has been really, really good. The last thing I'd like to ask you is, for what advice do you have for first, for new people coming into their career? They're coming out of school, or they've been in the service and they're coming out of the service and they're getting into their career. How can they use story as a springboard for them, or a joy and ease kind of thing, as you said in your. And then the same question, except for senior leadership. What should senior leadership think about when it comes to stories that would make their organizations more the culture they want rather than the one they have?
Yeah. Well, that first one, all right, the new professional coming in, maybe they just graduated, maybe they're coming out of the service, they're looking for that first or second job. They're roughly in their 20s, maybe early 30s, something like this. I actually did a TEDx talk on this very subject about 5 years ago, and people could find it if you just simply search Park Howell TEDx Gilbert. That's from Gilbert, Arizona.
Oh,
and
wow.
It's all about talking about find your scenes and your story will find you. And what I mean by that, arm yourself with those moments in your life, like mine, for instance. When I studied music composition and theory and journalism, people looked at me like, why are you doing that? And I go, because I'm really interested in music composition theory, always have been since I was a little kid. And I probably can use it to make money in the advertising world and build a career out of that. Well, that's an intersection there of that came together, and look at what I'm doing today, as we mentioned earlier. So what I mentioned to people is go and find those moments in your life that have shaped who you are today, because it is those moments that have fired up that curiosity and that passion in you to go and study what you did study or served in the armed forces. And it's that passion and curiosity that you want to link to that new job. And then you're going to bring some of those moments together, and you're going to arm yourself with stories for that interviewer, so that when they ask you about something, that you can take them to a moment in time and they can see it, they can feel it, they are there with you. And they're like, wow, okay, I get that. I could see how you could apply that in my world here. So it's about going back and collecting these stories and having them at the ready when you are going to, communicate with these folks. And then that cover letter, for God's sake, start that with an and but therefore, to get super focused on that problem solution dynamic that you're coming in to help them with, and then share an anecdote or two. I helped one lady, a good friend of mine, Jennifer Russo, and she was looking very high level communications marketing person. And we built a website for her. All it does is tells her story. She has her own brand position in there. She uses the and but therefore to set it up. She shares anecdotal stories about the impact she's had at different parts of her career, showing them in action. We have testimonials from people who worked with her that talk about her. And she just landed her next gig from that. And she said, the headhunter that looked at it said, I wished everybody did this, because it's showing the human side of Jennifer, what motivates her, what drives her, and how you could use that passion in your business. The CV and all that other stuff, that's the cost of doing business. You got to be good at what you do. You got to be educated if you're going to get into it. So is everybody else. And by the way, your competition might be better educated and maybe even better at doing what you're doing, but you will beat them every time with a powerful story.
Because you're hiring people.
You're hiring people. You buy from people you know, like, and trust, right? So leadership, you asked about that. The same is exact true with the leadership. If you want your people to really know you, then you got to get real with your stories and be vulnerable and share the highs and lows, where you blew it, what you learned in that process, how you came out of it over here. That's how they really start to know you. They start liking you when they feel like there's this connection between your story and their story. Like,
Yeah.
oh, Rick, you're just like me, except you make, 300,000 more than I do working here, 300 million, I don't know, but I can relate to you. Richard Branson is one of the most relatable senior
yeah.
leaders in the world because he's a brilliant storyteller. And then, of course, if you want to build trust in your culture, that whole DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, which is so important, but people pay such lip service to it. I can't tell you how many DEI consultancies I know that are going out of business because their clients first hired them and said, yeah, I don't think I really want to spend on that. It's really not that important to us at this point. Well, storytelling, as I mentioned, being that Velcro between cultures, is your DEI tool. You don't have to go out and profess it and pound your chest and say, we're so wonderful DEI, because most organizations are not. But if you practice good, authentic, powerful, vulnerable storytelling, you're going to build that known, like, and trust tripart structure to relationships that you want in your storytelling and in your culture.
Cool. Well, this has been fascinating. You've definitely opened my eyes to a whole lot of ways to both think about and apply storytelling that I certainly hadn't run across them in all the years I've been doing this. So thank you for that.
My pleasure. I appreciate you having me here so I could share our approach to it.
So do you have one last thing you want to tell us?
If people would like to learn more about it, they can go to my website, businessofstory.com/ABT. businessofstory.com/ABT. And they can learn about it. They can even take a quick little short course on how to build ABTs and start applying them immediately in their world. It's on Thinkific. They can check it out there. That's probably the best way to go. Or come and listen to my show. I've had a podcast for 8 years. Every Monday, I bring on a new story artist, or I share my work from my books and my trainings, so that you can continue to grow and excel as a powerful storyteller. And that's the Business of Story podcast.
Well, terrific. Thank you very much, Park. And I thank everybody for joining us this week. And hopefully you'll be back in 2 weeks for the next one. Thanks.